Hey everybody, Dr. G here. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist and personality disorder expert, and today we're going to be talking about bipolar disorder and relationships. Bipolar disorder can be incredibly challenging for relationships, and today we're going to be talking about all the different ways that it may be impacting relationships. Now, if you're in a difficult relationship, whether it's with someone who's bipolar or not, I highly recommend you take the quiz I have in my description, because it can help you better understand the impact your relationship may be having on you. And also like and subscribe if you like this kind of content. Anyway, moving on. So, what is bipolar disorder? Bipolar disorder is, in essence, a disorder where people go between mania and depression. And I'll explain what those mean. It actually used to be called manic depressive disorder because people go of phases between where they're feeling really energized and manic and excited, and they're feeling highly sexualized, or they're feeling impulsive or not sleeping. And it goes to this phase where people talk faster, they act faster, they feel pressured. You're around them and they're just, at times they can be just emanating energy. And that's what we typically see with mania. People can also have what's called dysphoric mania, where they're like that, but they're very agitated. And during manic phases, we see people engage in things they wouldn't normally. They get strange thoughts, depending on the severity, because there's two levels of bipolar. Bipolar 1, which is the more severe, and bipolar 2, which is less severe, but it still can be very pervasive in how much it affects people's lives. But during the manic phase, people can engage in cheating behaviors, they can do gambling, they can waste money, they can do things they wouldn't normally do. They engage in impulsive things that they wouldn't normally do. It's out of character for them. Not everybody knows when they're seeing someone who's manic. It can actually be very challenging. It sounds like when I describe it, it must be obvious when somebody's manic. But it isn't always the case. And what happens is that after the mania, which can last a few days, a couple of weeks, and in some cases, the more severe cases can last longer, then they slip into phases of depression typically, where it can be like low mood, feelings of worthlessness, low energy, insomnia, hypersomnia, where you sleep too much, the more typical signs of depression. And so they go through phases where there's the ups and there's the downs, and it can go over the course of a lifetime. Some people will have very few manic episodes, and they can be spaced very far apart. Some people have them very frequently. But it's a disorder that's really can be marked with irritability in quick phases of ups and downs, and that's where a lot of people kind of think it is, but it really is more about prolonged ups and downs. Rather than it being like this, it's more like this. But today I want to talk about how bipolar can affect relationships. So first, let's talk about how it affects romantic relationships. Being with someone who's bipolar can really test the strength of a relationship, because the question is, when someone's in a manic phase, do you hold them accountable for all the things they do? If this is somebody who normally, when they're not in manic phase or when they are treated and it's managed and all of that, are someone that is pretty predictable, that you love to be around, someone you care greatly about, when they're in the manic phase and then they cheat or they waste a bunch of money or they do something that's outlandish, how do you tolerate this? And that's the question. Do you have the kind of personality that can tolerate this? We're going to be talking in a couple of minutes more about the specifics of the kinds of behaviors people that get manic engage in more detail. But another area that can be impacted is work, because if somebody is, let's say they're in sales and they are traveling around the country and then they get manic when they're doing this, they might make a bad impression on a client. Or while they're traveling, they might engage in behaviors like hiring a prostitute or something that normally this person wouldn't do. There's all sorts of things that can happen that can put a lot of pressure on a job, because there are people that are engaging in behaviors that are outside of the bounds of what they find okay, but it's also caused by medical condition. So work can be very challenging. And on the other side, the depressive side, it can be hard to find motivation for work. It can cause problems where there's lots of time off. So for people with bipolar, they have to hopefully have an understanding job. It's not that they have to tell people at work that they have it. It depends on if they're trying to get accommodations or something like that. It all gets very complicated, and it's really something that you need guidance to be able to do. I wouldn't recommend just making all these decisions on their own, because they're very complicated. Parenting is another one that's very challenging, because when people are manic, sometimes they can make crazy decisions. Once again, spending lots of money, making their kids feel on top of the world, or they can be depressed and can be a very challenging parent to get to engage. And it's very hard for children to see this, especially when it's a severe case of bipolar that leads to something like hospitalization, which also happens, particularly with bipolar 1. Because people with bipolar 1 with the more severe sort of behaviors can sometimes get to a place where they are delusional or they're disconnected from reality. They have what we call fixed false beliefs, and all of a sudden need help beyond what the family can provide. And for children, that can be very stressful. It can be hard to watch, and it can be very scary. It can also be very scary for the person with bipolar. So this is a very challenging issue when it comes to parenting. So obviously, not all relationships with someone who has bipolar disorder are going to fail, but sometimes they do. And let's talk about the reasons that can pressure or challenge a relationship that do cause it to fail. Extreme shifts in mood is one of them. When people are depressed, they become moody, full of feelings of worthlessness, guilt, can become agitated, and when they're manic, especially if they're dysphoric, they can be very difficult to be around. So these extreme shifts of mood are exhausting. Most people like stability, they like predictability. And when somebody has bipolar disorder, unfortunately, by their very definition, they struggle with predictability. They struggle with this unless they're medicated and it's treated and you know what you're dealing with. But if you don't, or it's somehow mismanaged, it can be very challenging and unpredictable. The emotional ups and downs. Dealing with mania is exhausting, and dealing with depression can also be. So when you're with somebody who's fluctuating, not constantly between those two, because it's not like you have to be one or the other, but the shifts can be pretty dramatic, and they can last for a while. So oftentimes somebody is either mildly or severely depressed or manic. And dealing with this is very challenging. Once again, it's stability that a lot of people are looking for, and the lack of predictability can be very uncomfortable. It can be very challenging. Anger and rage. Now, this is one that can become very challenging if someone is in mania, particularly if they are bipolar 1. When they believe something that's unusual, or they're challenged in a way, or they're restricted and not able to do the things that they want to do, they can become angry and rageful. They can act out in ways they wouldn't normally, and that can be very scary. And so when somebody acts out in this way, some people set a clear line to say, I can't deal with that, and they leave the relationship. They go, I'm not here to manage that, and they can't tolerate it. And we've all got different things that we're okay with and that we can and can't tolerate. And this type of anger and rage that we sometimes see is a red line for some folks. Self-destructive behaviors. Drug use is not uncommon at all, or excessive alcohol use. Many different impulsive behaviors are extremely common during mania, and it can be very hard to watch. It can be hard for somebody who's not a professional, and even for some professionals, to really understand the helplessness that people deal with when they are manic. The terrible ideas that seem like good ideas at the time, the things that they engage in that feel so self-destructive, and they are self-destructive, but it's within the context of a time and a period where the person isn't thinking clearly. And for some people, they go, I can't deal with somebody who's going to drink like this, or drink and drive, or end up with another DUI because they were manic, or end up in another situation where they did drugs, or whatever it is. These manic phases can be exceedingly difficult because they really are impulsive and unusual behaviors that people may engage in. I know there was a psychologist actually with bipolar, and they'd said that during their manic phase, they went and bought people snake bite kits in a place where there weren't really any snakes. It seemed like a great idea at the time. They wasted some money. But the point is that you may engage in irrational or unusual behaviors during this time. Hypersexuality. If there's one issue that ends relationships with bipolar more than anything else, this would be the one. Because when people become hypersexual and they are impulsive and they are manic and they go around and they sleep with people, or they sleep with somebody because of some delusional sort of underpinning, which is on the more severe side, this is one that crosses the whole spectrum of bipolar disorder. Hypersexuality, cheating, it's one that some people say, I can't deal with that, whether somebody is ill or not. Some people say that that is absolutely a red line for them. I've seen plenty of relationships that have become challenged to the point of not working because infidelity was the line for them. And it's not always infidelity. Sometimes it's hypersexuality with their own partner. That tends to be less of an issue, but it's still an issue if you have somebody with a different libido, somebody with a manic libido dealing with somebody who may have a more average or even a lower one. Is going to be tremendously frustrating for both people. And so it can lead to arguments. It can lead to all sorts of frustrating situations for everybody involved. And so hypersexuality is the one I see leading to more clear-cut situations where people say, I don't care if they were manic or not, I don't want to do this anymore. Social isolation. This tends to come during the depressive phase. And oftentimes when people are feeling extremely depressed, they do isolate socially if it's severe enough. And with that, sometimes our partners are impacted by it as well because they don't want to do things with friends, they don't want to go out. So social isolation can become a big factor in frustrating the partner that doesn't have bipolar disorder. So how do you cope when you have a relationship with bipolar disorder and it fails? Is one, understanding that if you're the person with bipolar disorder, that everybody's got what they can and can't tolerate in relationships. And hopefully you're with somebody that has the ability to tolerate different fluctuations that you're going to have. And so, as frustrating as it can be, not everybody's built for that. Not everybody's built for being in a relationship with someone with bipolar disorder. If you're with somebody with bipolar and the relationship fails, it's understanding the mental illness underlying the challenges, underlying why cheating may have happened or why your partner may have gone and done something that was impulsive. Then you have to understand it has less to do with you and more the idea that your partner or former partner who had bipolar needs to be with somebody who can tolerate that type of lifestyle, and you have to be with somebody who has the stability you're looking for. Sometimes that's just how relationships go, unfortunately. But if you're in a relationship with someone with bipolar and you want to make it work, let's talk about the different things you can do. One is going to couples counseling, because oftentimes people that I see where there's a couple where one or the other has bipolar disorder, they tend to not have a really great depth of knowledge about this disorder, as most people don't. And there's plenty of clinicians who don't as well, if I'm being honest. So I wouldn't expect you to go into a situation knowing all about bipolar. But hopefully, if you have a therapist who's knowledgeable in this area, they can really help you understand what the diagnosis is, the impact it may have had, the different issues that it has caused, and to understand truly what the mania is and the kinds of things you can expect from it. Getting involved with treatment. As a partner of someone with bipolar, you can get involved with the treatment if your partner is comfortable with that. Because you may have to help them understand when they are getting manic. You may have to remind them to take their meds. You may have to do a lot of things involved with helping them manage their issue. Unfortunately, that's the reality of being the partner of someone with bipolar disorder, is there may be a lot that falls in your lap in order to help you have a higher quality relationship. Practice self-care. It is exhausting and challenging to be with someone with bipolar disorder, and that's just the reality of it, and that's okay. That doesn't make them bad people. It just means you've got to be able to find time for yourself to relax, to talk to someone, to get your own therapy about this. This is really, really important, and I see that when there's a marriage that is really working with someone with bipolar, it's because the person without bipolar is taking really good care of themselves, and they're setting really good boundaries about what they will and won't tolerate. Learning about the condition is so important. It's such a difficult condition to understand. It's so difficult to relate to unless you're talking to other people who have parents, siblings, spouses, whatever, with bipolar disorder. Unless you've been around it or unless you're a clinician, it can be very challenging to know how to deal with something like this. Create a support plan. You've got to know where you're going to get support from, because there are going to be challenges being with someone with bipolar. That just is the reality of the disorder, is that at times, it doesn't mean that it could be years and years apart when hard challenges come, but it's likely that there will be challenges at times. So having a support plan in place, having people you can talk to, whether it's a support group of people with spouses with bipolar disorder, for example, or it's just family and friends and people you can turn to when the challenges happen, it's vitally important that you've got this outlet. Communicate your feelings. Don't hold it all in, the frustrations that come with being with someone who's manic or being with someone who's depressed. You got to be able to talk about these feelings, whether it's with friends, family, a group, a therapist. You got to be able to talk about this stuff. You can't hold these things in. So if you're in a challenging relationship, I highly recommend, as I mentioned earlier, the quiz that you should take below. It'll give you some idea of whether or not maybe your relationship is having some impact on you. But if you like this kind of content and you want to learn more about mental health, please like and subscribe here. Thanks for watching.